Hi guys, Olive here today to bring you my winter book haul. If you've been around this channel for really any length of time, I am sure you've heard me talk about how much I love going to library book sales. There are always so many during the fall season, but I also like going to used bookstores. I like going to half-price books, and from time to time I also like to order from websites like Better World Books. There are always books coming into my life, so let me show you the ones I've picked up most recently. I will start off by showing you the 4 novels that I picked up, and one of those is The Silver Star by Jeanette Walls. This is a work of historical fiction. We follow a young girl who is being raised by her older sister since their mother is more or less absent, and it takes place between the 1940s and the 1970s in small town America, and a lot of the social and political happenings of those times make their way into this novel. I did just very recently finish her very famous memoir called The Glass Castle. I had some capital F feelings about that one, which I will reserve talking about for another time, but she definitely earned my respect as a novelist with her latest novel called Hang the Moon. I really enjoyed that. I actually reviewed it here on my channel in case you're interested in hearing my thoughts on that one, but I've been meaning to go back and read her earlier novels, so that's why I picked this up. Next up is a tiny little novel that I have been intending to get my hands on for a really long time now. It's called A Kestrel for a Knave by Barry Hines. And this book stars a 15-year-old boy being raised in poverty, and he begins to train a kestrel as a way to escape his everyday life and all of its challenges. This one has been beloved since its release in 1968, and given my love of birds, I am pretty positive I'm gonna love it too. I had seen a recommendation for this next one online, and then I kid you not, days later, I found a copy of it in the clearance section at Half Price Books. So it kind of felt meant to be for me to own a copy of American Mermaid by Julia Langbin, which is apparently 2 books in one. In one storyline, we follow an author whose novel has been optioned to become a film. We see her struggle to work with her very bro-y co-writers for the screenplay. And then the other storyline is that novel itself, which is apparently about a mermaid. Rachel Syme is the person who I saw recommend this one. I had mentioned her in my latest anticipated releases video because she has a book coming out in late January. She's also a staff writer for The New Yorker, and I love her taste in pretty much everything. So when she was talking about how much she loved this book, how much it surprised her, how much it made her laugh, I knew I wanted to read it. The last novel I got in this haul is another one I found in the clearance section at Half Price Books. I swear I made out so well that day in the clearance section. But this last novel is called The Last Collection by Jean Mackin. And in this book, which is historical fiction set in 1938 Paris, our focus is on the rivalry between the iconic fashion designers Coco Chanel and Elsa Schiaparelli. And we see what they're getting up to in 1938. So I imagine this book will be a mix of the glamorous and also the unglamorous. But speaking of glamour, kicking off my nonfiction picks is Brilliance and Fire, a biography of diamonds by Rachel Bergstein. And this is a book about the rise of the modern diamond industry. It's about the marketing of diamonds and how that marketing has solidified diamonds as status symbols in our modern day. But I also got a few more nonfiction books about specific objects, like The Notebook, A History of Thinking on Paper by Roland Allen, and this is the history of the humble notebook. From its creation to its role in essential tasks like accounting, to more creative work done by artists, writers, and many more. I love a good notebook myself, so this definitely caught my eye for that reason. Another microhistory I picked up a copy of is called One Good Turn, A Natural History of the Screwdriver and the Screw by Witold Rybczynski. And this book came to be because this author was assigned to write about the best tool invented in the last millennium, the best tool to create things with, that is. And he picked a hand tool, the screwdriver, which was actually invented a whole lot more recently than the screw. Interestingly enough. I'm not much of a DIY girl myself, but I am interested to read about this. I've heard some great reviews of this next one, so when I saw it at a library book sale, I did not hesitate to pick it up. It's called It's All a Game, The History of Board Games from Monopoly to Settlers of Catan by Tristan Donovan. And this is exactly what it sounds like. It is a history of board games, of tabletop games, and the psychology behind them. My husband and I really enjoy playing board games, especially this time of year, so I will be very excited to read this. Next up is a book from an author who I have just very recently read a book by. It is Never Out of Season: How Having the Food We Want When We Want It Threatens Our Food Supply and Our Future by Rob Dunn. And it seems like in this book, Rob Dunn is going to focus a lot on monocultures, which is essentially when we as people go all in on one type of plant. We are focusing all of our energy on planting that specific type of plant. And that puts our food security at risk if a disease or a pathogen were to come along and wipe out that entire crop, like what happened during the Irish potato famine. We didn't really learn our lesson with that, and we continue to focus a lot on monocultures. I've read Michael Pollan write about that in the past. It was really fascinating, and I'm not at all surprised that Rob Dunn is taking on the topic in this book, because the book I read of his most recently for Nonfiction November, called Never Home Alone, is essentially a celebration of biodiversity. He's making a case for biodiversity. And I imagine he'll do more of the same in this book, and I also hope more of his great writing is in this book. But speaking of diseases, my next book has to do with those as well, and this is another book that I found in the clearance section at Half Price Books. It was such a good shopping day. But that book is called Mountains Beyond Mountains: The Quest of Dr. Paul Farmer, the Man Who Would Cure the World by Tracy Kidder. And this book tells the story of a dedicated doctor who worked tirelessly to diagnose and treat infectious diseases all over the world. He brought much needed medical care to disadvantaged communities. And as I was reading reviews of this one, I saw how well loved, how well respected this book is. I'm pretty sure I'm going to enjoy it as well, and after I'm finished with it, I will probably send it along to my sister, who is a nurse. Shifting over to music now, especially given the recent announcement of the reunion tour, I just couldn't resist picking up a copy of Oasis, What's the Story by Ian Robertson when I placed my very first order with Blackwell's. This was written by the tour manager for the English rock band Oasis. He was their keeper, essentially, as they were touring during the 90s, which, minding rowdy, self-destructive rock stars at the height of their fame, yeah, no thanks. However, I will be interested to read about it, especially since my husband and I are really big fans. Our Song is actually one of their lesser known songs, and we see Noel every single time he tours here in the States. Similarly, I also got Uncommon People: The Rise and Fall of the Rock Stars by David Hepworth, and in this one, the music journalist author highlights defining moments of 40 rock stars from 1955 to 1995, which I'm assuming he's calling the age of the rock star. And it seems like this one may go hand in hand with the previous book because Oasis was very big at the tail end of that era, so I'm wondering if I should read these around the same time. But next, on to a different type of fame, infamy, you could say. I got a copy of The Con Queen of Hollywood: The Hunt for an Evil Genius by Scott C. Johnson. And this is an expanded version of a piece written for The Hollywood Reporter all about the Con Queen, who pulled off an elaborate deception and swindled Hollywood out of millions of dollars. This book just came out last year, but it already has a docuseries adaptation on Apple TV Plus called Hollywood Con Queen. Another book I picked up about a con artist is called, well, Con Artist: The Life and Crimes of the World's Greatest Art Forger by Tony Tetreault. And this is a memoir of a gifted art forger whose skill for mimicry is so good that he can recreate pretty much any work of art out there. That, in and of itself, is not a crime, but passing off his dupes as originals ended up landing him in prison. And this is his story. And I've been eager to read this since it came out in late 2022. Moving on to some more above-board nonfiction, or should I say all-aboard nonfiction, considering a lot of the books I have to show you next have to do with water. I also picked up a copy of The Hungry Ocean by Linda Greenlaw. And this is a memoir of a sword boat captain, and in it she describes a month-long journey that she and her crew took. They were 1,000 miles out to sea, and they very narrowly avoided disaster. The next time I'm craving some good adventure nonfiction, this is the first book I'm turning to. A much more peaceful book I picked up is called Still Waters: The Secret World of Lakes by Kurt Steger. And this book, fittingly, seems to blend philosophical musings, but also scientific information about lakes. And from what I've read, it seems like this whole thing was intended to pay homage to Walden, which I too was incredibly moved by when I first read it, so much so that I actually made a whole video in which I read passages from Walden. I'll link that video for you below and up in the cards if you like my voice and you want me to read to you. I'm realizing just now that I have way more American history books in this haul than I normally do. It's not my favorite subject to read about, admittedly, but these next few just called to me for whatever reason, and one of them is Mayflower, a story of courage, community, and war by Nathaniel Philbrick. And this is a history book about the crossing of the ship, the Mayflower, and the settlement of Plymouth Colony. And even though Nathaniel Philbrick is a very well-loved, well-respected history writer, I've never read any of his books before. Don't really know how that ended up happening, but it has happened. So unless someone tells me that this is a bad place to start with his books, this will be the first one of his I ever read. But another history writer who has a lot of fans out there, but who I am also completely new to, is David McCullough. I found a copy of his book, The Pioneers, the heroic story of the settlers who brought the American ideal west. And again, unless anyone out there thinks there's a better place to start with his work, then this story of a group of 18th century Americans who set off to settle in what would become Ohio will be where I start with his work. Another book I picked up that is about traveling around this country is called Life on the Mississippi, an Epic American Adventure by Rinker Buck. And in this book, the author provides his account of how he built a modern update on a 19th century flatboat and then used it to sail first down the Monongahela, then the Ohio, then the Mississippi River, all the way down to New Orleans. I already have another book by this author all about the Oregon Trail, so when I saw this one at a used bookstore, I had to pick it up. I actually found this next one in the exact same used bookstore as the previous book. It is called The Heartland, An American History by Kristen L. Hoganson. And this is a book all about the history and the myths of the American Midwest, all the people who have resided there, and also, apparently, all the cows. I hear there's a lot in this book about cows, which I know may not interest everyone, but I am someone who made a whole review video on 2 books on cows, which I will link for you below and up in the cards. So that part of this book appealed to me for sure. More American stories. I also got First Women, The Grace and Power of America's First Ladies by Kate Anderson Brower, which tells the tales of 10 different wives of American presidents. A few years back, I actually read the early chapters of this one over on the Threadable app, so I was thrilled to see this at a library book sale. I would really like to go back and finish it. I found the next 2 at the exact same library book sale. One of them is called The Gentleman's Daughter: Women's Lives in Georgian England by Amanda Vickery. And this book describes what a genteel 18th century British woman's life would have been like. I know this one is going to probably lean a little bit toward the academic side because it's a university press book, but it just seems so perfect to pair up with a classic. And then I showed off this next one on the Nonfiction November Instagram during Nonfiction November because it fit the Path Challenge so flawlessly. It's called Women Walking: Freedom, Adventure, Independence by Karen Sagner. And this is a survey of over 60 works of art that all show women walking freely, by themselves, in public, which was a revolutionary thing at one period of time. The works of art in here are stunning. Another woman's story, I picked up a copy of Desert Queen, The Extraordinary Life of Gertrude Bell, Adventurer, Advisor to Kings, Ally of Lawrence of Arabia by Janet Wallich. And this is a biography of a remarkable woman who worked for the British Empire and represented its interests in the Middle East during World War I. From biography now to memoir, I was really happy to find a copy of Don't Think, Dear, On Loving and Leaving Ballet by Alice Robb. And this is the author's story of doing ballet up until the age of 15 when she realized that she wasn't going to make it as a professional, so she stopped. But then it took her years of work after no longer doing ballet to shake off some of the more toxic aspects of the ballet world that she had unknowingly internalized. The penultimate book in this haul also discusses girls in sports. It's called My Home Team, A Sports Writer's Life and the Redemptive Power of Small-Town Girls Basketball by Dave Kindred. This is the memoir of a very successful sports writer, and in it he talks about his love for watching and covering his Illinois hometown's high school girls basketball team and what lessons that has taught him about community and togetherness. This sounds absolutely beautiful. The final book I have to show you in this haul is also about basketball, but this one is much spicier than the previous book. It's called When the Game Was War, The NBA's Greatest Season by Rich Cohen. And this book discusses the 1987 to 1988 NBA season. It was a very transformative time for the league with lots of new stars and plenty of drama. I am much more of a WNBA fan myself. However, this past season of the WNBA, I have heard this era of the WNBA be compared to this time in the NBA. And I would very much like to understand those references, so this came out at just the right time for me. But those are all the books that I've picked up recently. I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below. Have you read any of these? Would you recommend some over others? Are you now interested in reading any of these now that you've seen them in this video? Please do tell me any or all of that or any additional comments or questions you may have. All of the books I did show you today will be listed and linked for you in the description box below for your clicking convenience. I'll also include links to any other videos I may have mentioned throughout this video, and at the very bottom of the exact same description box, you will also see links to everywhere you can find me around the internet, like Goodreads, Instagram, the Story Graph, all the places I'm the most active, in case you want to keep up with what I'm reading and doing right now. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.